Okay, so I hit record, and Ernest, just give you a thumbs up when we are live on social media.
I'm going to count you down.
Okay, great.
Okay. Is everybody ready?
Yes.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Lee Perry. I'm a local community organizer and climate activist. And I am so honored to have a very dear friend who's also been a community champion, Rishi Bagga, who was appointed to the Charter Review Commission and is going to talk about some of these awesome charter amendments that are going to be on our November ballot. So Rishi, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about you and your background.
Absolutely. Well, Lee, thanks so much for this wonderful invitation. It is an honor to be able to speak to all of you about this today. My name is Rishi Bagga. I am an attorney, and I've been longtime resident here in Orange County. Moved here when I was about 10 years old, so about 30 years ago. So it's been some time, but really involved in the community and really feel very honored to be able to be involved with these particular issues and known Lee for a couple of years as well. So thankful to be able to help on this. I started my career as a prosecutor, but a lot of my career has been spent on government issues, both on issues as they relate to, both on all sides of things, sometimes defense, sometimes plaintiff side. But more and more, especially as I've been part of the Charter Review Commission, I've been pretty involved in some of the issues that are facing Orange County. And so it was really an honor to be able to serve on the Charter Review Commission for 2024. I will talk a little bit more about that, and I guess I'll just share my screen here if it works, and that way I can I made a little presentation here. I've done a couple of these presentations, so I think it might be easier for you all to be able to follow along on that. So
That would be great. And yes, and please tell us a little bit about what a charter is and
yeah,
why Orange County is a charter county.
absolutely. Can you all see this okay? Or not yet?
I cannot, oh, there we go.
There we go. All right, fantastic. Great. Well, I guess talk a little bit about a charter. And I know some of these things are probably very basic and you may know about them already, but in all candor, and I've been practicing law for 17, 18 years at this point, and even I did not know a lot of these issues until I really started to work on them because they kind of get deep into local government issues. And so I think it'd be helpful to have an overview and some background on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a charter is, how you go about amending a charter. I'm going to talk about the 8 proposed ballot amendments that were done by the Charter Review Commission, and then the 2 additional amendments that are added by the Commission in recent years, in recent weeks. Let me first just start by saying, and I guess I'm a lawyer, so I got to give you a disclaimer here, but anything I'm talking about today are my own views. I'm not speaking on behalf of the 2024 Charter Review Commission, though I was a member of it. So I can give you a little bit of insight as to, what was discussed, but certainly not speaking on its behalf. So with that started, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the charter itself. Now, the charter is kind of like the county's constitution. If you think of, the Florida Constitution and you look at Florida statutes, it kind of gives you a bit of you can look at that as an analogy as to how our county's constitution sort of works. The Florida Constitution has set up since 1968 a system of charter counties. Now, what that system does is it basically allows for the county to have some level of self-government, and it allows the county to tailor its government structure to meet the needs of the local community. And so that allows citizens within those counties to have initiatives, to have referenda, allows us to have recall rules, all those kinds of things that maybe a state would be able to do and operate on its own. A county can do a lot of those things because of this charter form of government. And Orange County is one of 20 charters that counties that we have. It's about 75% of Florida's population, and that's just because the bigger counties tend to be, the more populated counties tend to be charter counties. And there are some procedural parts of that and some substantive parts. So procedure basically means like, how can we actually go about changing this? And then substantive parts basically means like, what sort of rights do you have by living in that county? So both of those things, which are things you'd normally find in a constitution, are present in a charter as well. And so I like to think of it, like I was saying, as a good analogy to, our state constitution versus a state statute. I would put in, the pecking order of law, things that are in the charter have a bit more protection. Just like things that are in a constitution have more protection versus a statute. Same way, if something's in the charter, it has more protection than a county ordinance. And one of the reasons why is just the way you go about making amendments. So if you needed to change the Florida Constitution, it's not just something the legislature can do, right? It needs something that needs to go on the ballot. The citizens have to vote on it. And that's how you actually go about changing the Florida Constitution. The charter works similarly. So a charter actually has to be amended by the people versus a statute, which is in a county context, what we call an ordinance, that can just be amended by a majority of the Board of County Commission. So it really, when something is part of our charter, it's a lot more protected in many ways. So how do you go about amending the charter? And this is relevant, good information, but it's also relevant specifically to some of these charter amendments, or one of the charter amendments that I'm going to talk to you about. There's really 3 different ways you can go about amending the charter. One of them is through an initiative petition. So just like we got abortion on the ballot here in Florida, in order to do that, what we needed to do is get a whole bunch of folks to sign a petition, and that had to go through a whole process in order to get it onto the ballot. Same way, that is there, you have that option of changing the county charter the same way as well, but it's really hard. You have to get 10% of the folks who are 10% of the voters in each commission district, and there are 6 commission districts, to sign a petition. That's really, really hard to do. So I don't even know the last time, if ever, there has been an initiative petition coming up. I'm just not familiar with one. So, but that is a way to do it. The second way to do it is by the Board of County Commissioners. So this is where the Board of County Commissioners, which is kind of like our legislative body, and there are 6 commissioners and the mayor, they can actually vote on on adding something to the ballot as well. So finally, there's method 3, and that's through the Charter Review Commission. Charter Review Commission is a group of citizens. It's 11 to 15 members. They're appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, and they do a comprehensive study of any and all phases of county government. So they have the right to every 4 years get together and look at all of the various issues that may exist in our county government, and then they can propose amendments or revisions. And what's really unique to Orange County is that they don't have to, they don't require the approval of the board. In a lot of counties, if they have a charter review commission, that charter review commission has to write up their proposed amendments. They then go to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners has to approve it. It's kind of cool in Orange County, we don't have to do that. So we could put things directly onto the ballot, which we were able to do. So again, I was proud to be a member of the Charter Review Commission for 2024. And in that, we had 15 members. 2 of them were from each commission district, and 3 of them were from the county mayor. We were appointed in January of 2023. We had monthly meetings of the entire CRC. They were open to citizens. They were put on Orange TV and on YouTube. There were public meetings that took place in each one of the county commission districts. We had 5 different subcommittees that focused on various specific issues. Each of them held numerous public meetings. Like some of them were 10, 15, 20 different public meetings just for the subcommittees themselves. And then we took our final votes and had our last meeting on May 30th this year. And we voted to add 8 different ballot measures to the November 2024 ballot. By all accounts, this is the most number of measures that have ever been added to the ballot. I think we've had a charter, the current charter, since 1989, and by our reading, no one else had ever tried to amend it this many times at once. So really, that makes us one of the most consequential revamps of the charter in its history. And it touches on a variety of different procedural and substantive matters. I'll go into each one. The order may not seem like it makes a whole lot of sense, but that's because they were all added on the ballot at random. We literally threw all the various measures into a hat and picked them out, and that's the order that they're in. And only the summary itself appears on the ballot. So I'm going to show you the summary here, but I'm going to give you a little bit more background and context on them. If you actually want to read the full amendment, you can go on the comptroller's website. There's, I think, also a Charter Review Commission website as well, and you should be able to pull up the full amendment on each of those. So I'm going to dive right in here. Question number 1. This is a proposed revision to the initiative process. So I'm not going to read out the entire language here. You can kind of look at the language yourself. But basically what this does is this revises the charter's initiative petition process. Let me go to the next page here, and I'll kind of go into a bit more detail about what this does. So I was mentioning to you earlier that one of the ways that you can amend the county's charter is by an initiative petition, right? You can go around, go to 10% of each commission district and get people to sign it. Now, if I'm not mistaken, each commission district has about 250,000 people in it, something like that. So to get 10% of each district is ridiculously high. And it would be, even if you reduce that by the number of actual voters, there's still a ton of voters in each district. And so it would be really difficult to get 10% of each of them. So what this particular amendment would do is it would make it easier to get a citizen initiative on the ballot. And what it does is it reduces the number of petitions needed to get a citizen measure from 10% in each district down to 5% to amend the charter. One other interesting thing that is in our charter is you can actually use an initiative not only to amend the charter, but to enact, amend, or repeal an ordinance. So again, an ordinance is kind of like like a statute. We can actually change statutes in our or ordinances in our county too, based on what our charter says. Right now, it requires 7%. It will bring it down to 3%. And it also makes a couple of procedural differences in that it changes the fiscal impact process, the legal review process. Now, right now, once you start this process, you gotta, get a legal panel together of all these lawyers who have to take care and, make an analysis of all this stuff. Now, instead of doing all of those requirements, you can get a financial impact statement just upon getting 1% of the signatures, and it doesn't need to be on the petition. That's getting a little bit into the weeds, but right now you need to make sure that a certain number of the petitions you get signed have information about the financial analysis on it. That just makes it harder, is really what this does. And so now you don't have to do that, which is really helpful. The second thing is, in order to get a legal review panel, you just need 3 licensed Florida attorneys to review it and write letters, which makes it, again, much easier to do. So fundamentally, this charter review amendment, this charter amendment just takes the process from, in my view, nearly impossible to quite difficult. It's still not going to be easy. right? I mean, and a lot of folks don't think it should be easy, right, to put something on the ballot. And I'm not taking a position on it, but certainly, if, in my view, if the charter gives a process for citizens to be able to get something on the ballot, it should be a process that's even conceivable versus a process that's really quite impossible. And so I think that that's why it's really important to support this particular charter amendment. Now, let's move on to number 2. This relates to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Again, I'll just read the title: Orange County Charter Amendment requiring continued existence of Affordable Housing Trust. I'm going to go into the, again, I'm just going to provide you this ballot summary here. You can review it later, and if somebody would like to, have this PowerPoint, happy to share it. But let me go into what this really does. So currently, and this was something that Mayor Demings did on his way in, there was a creation of an Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But right now, that exists in the county code. Again, that basically means that it's set up as a statute, but it could be taken away by a future Board of County Commissioners. It basically exists only for a certain period of time. And what this would do is, rather than it just being a creature of ordinance, it would put this Affordable Housing Trust Fund into the charter itself. And again, that gives it a whole bunch of protections, right? It makes it a lot harder for a future Board of County Commissioners to take it away. And I think that's really important, right? That demonstrates that we have a continued commitment to affordable housing in our community. Now, look, we're always going to have this problem. And so we should always have a continuing commitment to making sure that we're addressing these issues. And so this would be one way that we can do that. One of the ways that it could do that is it can help spur more affordable housing investment, right? For folks who develop affordable housing and other interested parties, they know that if this trust fund is always there, then they can sort of rely on that as they make decisions for developing affordable housing in the future. And it also includes that any money that the county commission allocates towards this affordable housing trust fund, that money does not revert back to general revenue. So it's not like you might have heard the term in other government contexts, use it or lose it, right? That if money gets allocated or budgeted for a particular reason, and that agency or fund doesn't use it, it goes back to the general general fund. This specifies it doesn't do that. So even if we don't always use our money in this trust fund, it will sit in this fund, and that's a good thing. That way in the future, folks can rely upon it being there. Now, one thing to note is that this amendment does not specify how much money the Board of County Commission has to give to this trust fund. And that's really a legal, a legal limitation that we have as a charter review commission. We can't do that. There's a variety of legal reasons why we can't do that, but we can't tell the BCC where to spend its money. That's something that only the BCC can do. However, we still felt that if we put this into the charter, that's going to put pressure on the BCC to always allocate some money towards it, right? And so this is kind of our way of expressing what we think is an important commitment within our community. And finally, we think it plants the seed for considering new sources of funding. In the actual language of this amendment, we have specified that while it's not required, this can also be funded by things such as municipal contributions, grants and donations, private money, basically, mandatory or voluntary payments from developers and other sources. So again, by doing this, by putting it in the charter, and by specifying that this is not something that only needs to be funded by general revenue, but the Board of County Commissions can specify that, maybe it should come from developer money. Maybe it should come from municipal contributions. By specifying that these are all potential sources, we're hoping what we're doing is planting the seed for a greater commitment to affordable housing with more creative funding sources as well. Question 3. This relates to write-in candidate effect on timing of charter officer elections. And this is one of those things that, as we have our county elections, becomes increasingly relevant and continues to be relevant. So let me talk to you a little bit about what the current rules are on this. Now, at present, if there is a county election, right? And these are for county officials, these are for commissioners as well. If there are only 2 candidates for a county office, that election is going to appear on the November ballot. However, if there are 3 or more candidates, the race will appear on the August primary ballot, with a runoff if no one gets to 50% of the vote. Now, this seems to make sense. However, what you may not realize is that if you are a registered write-in candidate, you count towards that calculation. Now, what is a registered write-in candidate? That almost seems like an oxymoron. I mean, it kind of is, but you can actually run as a write-in candidate. And the way you do that is you go down to the supervisor election, say, I'm going to run for, let's say I'm running for property appraiser, supervisor elections, any one of these county positions we have, and say, I'm going to run for it, but I'm not going to go through the whole process of, petitioning in or paying my filing fee or anything like that. Instead, I just want to register my name as a write-in candidate. Well, what that does is that can bump it from 2 candidates to 3 candidates. And what that would do is change when the election actually happens, right? So what it would do is, if at present there's only 2 candidates for any one of these county positions, but a 3rd person comes and says, I'm going to be a write-in candidate, now an election that was going to happen in November gets pulled to August. And that has a lot of repercussions, right? Because I think we all know that turnout's far lower when it comes to August elections than it comes to November elections, right? Unfortunately, we don't have enough folks, and not as many folks decide to come out in August on the primary than they do for the general election. Usually, the general election will have the president will be on there or the governor will be on there, and so we tend to get higher turnout for those. And so this sort of creates an incentive for folks who think that, maybe have a better chance of winning in August, if that's when the ballot is. And all you need to do is, tell someone to run as a write-in, and then you can get the primary, your election pulled to October instead. And then, because there's lower turnout, it's easier for you to get a win outright by getting to 50%. It also creates the issue of increasing costs and funds that need to be raised, right? I've run for office. It is not cheap. And when you have now 2 elections to run in August and then also in November, that's going to increase your costs, the amount you got to raise, a variety of number of issues that it creates. So all this charter amendment would do is it says that if you are going to run as a write-in candidate, then that does not count towards the 2 candidates that it would need to appear in November, right? It does not count as the 3 or more candidates that you would need in order to run to pull the race to August. If there ends up being just 2 candidates, and though a lot of these are nonpartisan, nonetheless, typically there's 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, and we kind of know who they are. One side can't just put in a write-in candidate in order to make this election happen in August instead of in November. It doesn't prevent anyone from running as a write-in. It just specifies that that person doesn't count towards that calculation and will not trigger a primary election. I like to think of this as just an amendment that would reduce opportunity for shenanigans. Let's talk about question number 4. This relates to a fiscal sustainability tool. To briefly go about it, this requires that the county charter is amended so that no later than October 2025, the county has to adopt a fiscal sustainability analysis in order to enable the county to evaluate the impact of certain developments. Now, this relates to a number of amendments that have been proposed. I'm going to talk about the rest of them in more detail, but this is kind of the first of this suite of amendments that really relate to development and the sort of development decisions that are made in our county by our Board of County Commissions. You know, this has always been a big concern. And when we were going around the county and speaking to citizens who live throughout the county, it was wild that we were getting this same message regardless of what party you were from, regardless of what side of the county you lived on, right? We had folks who, left-leaning folks like myself, who were for revisiting how we make development decisions in our county. And, it was because of environmental concerns or, because of affordable housing concerns. Well, we would have folks also show up to these meetings, wearing MAGA hats and being in favor of revisiting how we do our development decisions because they wanted to maintain the character of the rural areas that they lived in. So this was one of these interesting things that was supported by a broad spectrum of the county. And so I'll discuss each of those, rural boundary, urban area development things. But this is kind of the first of that suite. And this was related to a fiscal sustainability tool. Now, why do you need this? Well, we have something called a comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan, and this is required by every county has to adopt one of these comprehensive plans. And a comprehensive plan is sort of like a blueprint for the future for the county, right? And it includes all kinds of things. It includes, where are we going to develop? Where are we not going to develop? What's going to be considered an urban area? What's going to be considered a rural area? And all kinds of decisions that are made in a county are based upon a comprehensive plan. So that includes, where are we going to build schools? Where are we going to have, more housing come in? Where are we going to have, more dense development, and where are we going to have less dense development? All these sorts of decisions are put into a comprehensive plan. And as part of that comprehensive plan, we're actually required that the county do an analysis on any time that there's changes to that comprehensive plan as to whether or not those changes are sustainable. But what we learned in our review of the county's processes is that this has never actually been implemented. And that was kind of shocking to us, really. I sat on the sustainable housing sustainable development and affordable housing subcommittee for the Charter Review Commission. And it was pretty wild to talk to the planning folks because they kind of recognized that this requirement was there, but no one had ever actually, pushed them to implement it. And so when we were asking county staff, like, what sort of decisions do you look at when somebody comes forward to you and says, hey, we're going to, make a change to the comprehensive plan, for example, how far ahead are you planning? And we learned that they're generally only planning 5 years ahead. And that really just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? I mean, let's say, I'll put it really basically here. Let's say you are deciding whether you're going to have a large new residential development take place in an area that's currently undeveloped, right? And so you need to make decisions as to whether approve that or not approve that. Well, if you're only looking 5 years down the line, it probably seems like a better deal, right? Because it looks like, well, we're going to develop these new houses. We're going to require the developer to pay into it. And we're going to make sure that they build the various roads and all kinds of other things that we need to do for that. And it looks like all those things are paid for the next 5 years. But the reality is that those costs increase over time, right? It may not cost a whole lot to put in a new pipe for the first 5 years. But as you put new pipes in 20 years down the line, it's going to cost a whole lot more because you have to maintain those things. You put new roads in, those are going to cost you, not in the first 5 years when the road's just fine, but 20 years from now, when you have to maintain that road and when the traffic's higher and when you got to, increase the density of it and fix the potholes, all that ends up costing a whole lot more down the line. And so we just thought that it was important to actually do the sustainability and to make sure that these decisions that are made with a long scope, right, to the furthest date of the comprehensive plan. So for example, you might have heard of Vision 2050, right? What that is Orange County's commission coming up with the comprehensive plan to see not where we want our community to be in the next 5 years, but where we want it to be in the next 25 years. So since that's where we're planning with the comprehensive plan, we think that the county should be doing its fiscal analysis at that same interval, right? Up to 2050, we should be planning and seeing what the costs are going to be when we green light these sorts of things. So we've spoken to a lot of companies and folks who work in this field, and it's neat. There's actually are these sorts of sustainability tools already out there, and us just inquiring into this already pushed the county a lot towards adopting one of these tools. But we want to make sure that the county continues to do it, and that's why we pushed for the adoption of a fiscal sustainability tool in the charter. So I talked a lot there, but that's because a lot of these issues overlap with some of the things I'm going to be talking about. So hopefully you can keep that in mind as we talk a little bit about growth controls and things like that. All right, question 5. This is the office of the county attorney. This is one of those things that's kind of deep into the weeds as well. But as a lawyer, and we had a lot of lawyers who were on the CRC, this felt important to us. And what you may not know is that Orange County does not have a county attorney in its charter. We're actually the only one of 20 charter counties that doesn't have it. In most of the charters, there's actually a separate section that creates an office of the county attorney. Instead, what we have is a division of legal services, and it talks about the various administrative divisions of the county mayor. It just lists it underneath that as a division of legal services. Well, the problem with that, and this is something that was expressed to us by the county commissioners, as well as other folks, is that there, when you're a lawyer, you worry about who your client is, and this sorts of creates that issue. Is right now when we talk to the county mayor, who is your client? They generally say, yeah, well, we represent the county government, the commissioners, the mayor, everything. But that's not something that's in the charter. And a lot of folks felt that it was important to, in the charter, specify that there is a county mayor, a county attorney, and that county attorney's job is to represent all of the county government, the BCC, the mayor, administrator, etc. And our hope was, and certainly a lot of the folks who were on the BCC who expressed their concerns, that by doing this, we can make sure that the each of the commissioners is also represented by the county attorney, and they have a say. We kind of specify how they can be appointed and confirmed and removed as well. So I think it makes the county attorney more responsive to the entire government, but certainly to the commission as well, not just the mayor, as there's an argument to be made. It was currently structured. So this is another big one. The question 6, this relates to the county commission districts. Now, currently, we have 6 county commission districts. This amendment would amend it so that we will have 8 county commission districts. There would need to be a new map that was drawn by November 1st of 2025 in order for us to have an election in time for the 2026 general election. And one of these districts would be a 2-year term. Generally, we have 4-year terms, but this would create a 2-year term in order to create staggered terms so that we end up moving to 4-year districts after that. Now, what is the purpose of this? Well, we have 6 districts right now, and that was implemented in 1988. It's important to note here that at the time, the population of the county was 621,000 folks. Now it's 1.5 million, and it's rapidly growing. And so it's kind of wild. We think of our county commission as being the closest form of government, perhaps, to us, especially for those of us like myself who don't live in a municipality or in a city. But we actually have more folks who live in our county commission districts than even in our state house districts. So in some respects, we're expecting our county commission to be as, the most responsive form of government to our local concerns, but we've given them so many folks that it's really hard for them to represent them all. And we spoke a lot to the commissioners on this as well. They have a tough time. They're representing a huge group of folks, trying to deal with the constituent concerns of a huge group of folks. And we also, in looking at this, realize that larger counties tend to have more commissioners. I mean, there's a whole range, but some of the larger counties in our in our state have anywhere from 8 to 15 commissioners. And so by making these districts smaller, the hope is that more commissioners would be available to provide service, because they'd be have a tighter group of folks that they have to represent. But also, right now, our districts just have a strange map. I mean, we have, sometimes people in parts of the county you would not necessarily think are represented by the same commissioner as other parts of the county. But if we get to have smaller, more tight geographic districts, we could hopefully have better constituent services, maybe even some more diversity in our county, by making sure that that particular communities are grouped together and have are entirely represented by a commissioner. Question number 7 is related to the creation of a TransMAC, or this was the acronym we came up for the Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission. Now, this is really one of those unique sort of novel things we came up with, and we don't know of any other county that has something like this. But this is born out of the issues that we have related to transportation in this county, which I think are well discussed, and something we've been talking about for a long time. The first thing to remember is that we have a $22 billion shortfall in addressing the transportation needs of the county. And over and over again, there's been this effort to get a transportation sales tax, and it either fails or doesn't get to the ballot. And one of the reasons why is there always seems to be a lack of transparency, right? We don't know when, if that tax were to pass, where that money would go, and if the citizens would have sufficient input on where those transportation dollars are being spent. So the goal here is to try to create some more trust between the citizens and county government when it comes to these transportation issues, to create sort of a forum for public to give input on transportation priorities rather than a rubber stamp. And why I call it a rubber stamp is, what we found is so many times when the county's going to vote on something related to transportation, it's sort of something that's just on like the consent agenda at the BCC. Basically, it's something that just shows up like, hey, we're going to approve this gigantic budget for roads, and folks really don't have time to go into it and actually look in detail as to what these decisions actually are. And so we wanted to make sure that there is a place for the citizens to do that. So what this does is it creates a commission of citizen members equal to the number of BCC members. So however number of BCC members we have at the end of the day, whether it's 6 or 8, each of them get to appoint someone for a 2-year term. And what would happen is during the budget cycle, all of the transportation funding that's proposed by the county staff first goes to the TransMAC. And both that commission as well as public hearings that are held by the commission, where any citizen can show up, can really look at what these expenditures are, and if there's things that they like or don't like, they can make them known in these public hearings. And then the TransMAC will issue a report to the BCC that provides its recommendations regarding these fundings before the BCC votes on the budget. So while we, again, can't control what the Board of County Commission does and where they spend their money, the thought is if you have this citizen group that's job it is to look at where that money goes, and let's just say we say great, you're spending on roads, but you need to spend more on public transit, just as an example, right? Then those recommendations can be something that that go to the Board of County Commission, and they can keep that in mind as they're voting and deciding what they want to support. That's sort of one half of it, is the budget part. The second half of it is that the Transmac would have the ability to hold public meetings to review new transport systems and emerging mobility options. So the time that we're not in budget season for the county, the Transmac could still meet and discuss other issues such as public transportation, new forms of transportation, all those kinds of new and emerging things that are happening. A group like the Transmac, the thought is, would be the forum for us to have those sort of novel discussions, and then eventually make reports and sort of present that to the Board of County Commission. So it also allows the ability, the Transmac would also have the ability to audit and review prior expenditures that would make. So there'd be this sort of look back period in which the Transmac could go back, look at where money was spent by the board, and make its observations as to whether or not it was worth it, and that would hopefully advise the board in the future. Again, first of its kind idea, but the thought is that this is a great way for citizens to have input in transportation issues, as to transportation issues for the county, and hopefully that would work to create more trust between the board and if we eventually do have a transportation sales tax, or if we're able to get the law changed and maybe use some of that the tourist tax funding and things like that, hopefully there's more trust between citizens and the commission on this issue. And then finally, this is another one of these issues as it relates to development. This would require the county commission to have a supermajority vote. So basically one vote, a majority plus one, in order to change anything that's currently considered a county protected land. So parks and recreation areas, environmentally sensitive areas. There's a lot of things that are either owned by the county, or they are co-owned by the county, or there's an agreement with the county and some other government organization to take care of these areas. This would make sure that the BCC cannot change those purposes without a majority plus one vote, or a supermajority vote. In the past, companies, developers, etc., have tried to build things on county land. We know there's been recent discussion for this sort of thing happening on state lands, and so this is just a way to make sure that we can make it very difficult, quite simply put, for the county to change the purposes of these lands, and create some significant political pressure for them. So if there was ever a decision to change the purpose of one of these lands, it wouldn't be done lightly. So those are the amendments that were passed by the Charter Review Commission. Now, one other issue we discussed at length, and that was to create a rural boundary. And as you may have been watching in the news, and it's been very much discussed for the last couple of weeks and months here, during the legislative session, the state legislature, it was really a senator in particular, added an amendment to a commerce bill that basically took away the right of the CRC to do it. But let me go over what we were trying to do, and then I will talk a little bit about what the state of these particular amendments are. So what we were trying to do was adopting the urban service area line. I talked a little bit about Vision 2050. Again, that's the county's comprehensive plan. And if you looked at the comprehensive plan, it does draw a line in areas that are supposed to be considered rural and areas that are urban. And in those urban service areas, that's usually, unless a municipality or there's not a joint planning agreement with a municipality, unless it's like one of these specific situations, that's where the county provides service. So that's where, you know, we put pipes in and we put roads, and it's the county's job to make sure that those places are maintained. There's already a line that's drawn in Vision 2050. But what we were trying to do is get that line and add it to the charter, and therefore protect that line within the charter. And so what we would do is, if you tried to change the density or intensity outside of that boundary, you would again have a supermajority vote, or majority plus one, like I discussed for this for the protected lands amendment. And it would preempt any municipal land development regulation. So in other words, if a city tried to annex it or try to change it, or they try to adopt a more lenient land development regulation, then the counties would control. So that's what we tried to do. And it's notable that a lot of other counties, or a couple of other counties, have done this sort of thing. In some cases, it's actually a lot more strict. So, these are not all like, dark blue counties. I mean, I point to Sarasota County, for example. Sarasota even has a stronger rural boundary protection that required unanimous consent from the county commission if they wanted to make any changes in their rural area. So again, this is not out of nowhere. And in our area, we have Seminole County, which of course has a rural boundary for a number of years, and they're talking about strengthening it this year as well. So this is not something we just came out of with whole cloth, and again, something that was pretty broadly supported. But I have guesses as to why this happened, but it was certainly the Republican majority voted an amendment that took away our right to do it. So what we did was we felt strongly enough about it that we passed this issue. We kind of passed a resolution, I'll say, or we voted to pass this along to the county commission to try to pass this. And over the last few weeks and months, with a lot of discussion and a lot of pressure on the county commission, they have now decided to add 2 amendments to the ballot related to our study and what we wanted to do. So I'm guessing it'll be question 9, and some of this stuff we haven't actually seen the ballot yet, but I'm sure we will be in the couple of weeks coming. Is this charter amendment, which would establish a rural boundary and rural area. This is the ballot language as passed by the county commission. And what it does is, oops, I did not change that particular thing. But what it would do is it basically, that's my fault. I didn't fix that slide here. But what it would do is it again creates that rural boundary line. It gets that line and it adds it into the charter. And what it would do again, as we had proposed, is if the Board of County Commission wants to change any density or intensity, in other words, green light a more intense development in an area that's currently considered rural, then it needs to be approved by a majority plus 1 of the entire membership of the county commission. So again, that would hopefully create some significant political pressure before the county green lights this. There are a number of reasons why we've wanted a rural boundary. And, I'll talk a little bit about that, right? There are certainly environmental reasons. When it comes to continual development in these, sensitive areas, these rural areas, wetlands, things like that, we've heard from countless residents who are in a lot of these areas or who are in agricultural communities. They're getting flooded out because we keep adding more concrete and roads to these areas, and there's nowhere for the water to go. And so, there are some serious environmental issues that happen there. For a lot of these folks that are, in agricultural areas, and we sometimes don't think about it, but there are some significant agricultural communities in Orange County. They're losing a lot of the character of their area, and traffic is increasing, and all those kinds of things are increasing as well. So there's a number of reasons why we want to do this, but for a lot of us, and I count myself in this, we just thought that a lot of the development that needs to happen in Orange County, and there certainly needs to be, there's more folks who are moving here and we have, a real shortage of housing. We think a lot of that housing and development needs to be kind of growing up and not just outwards. And too much of that development has always been growing outwards, which has all these other repercussions versus growing upwards and redeveloping areas that need to be. There's a lot of urban, infill that's necessary. I think we need to be more creative about, mixed use developments and things like that, that we should have and that other communities have. But because we never get that density, it's hard for us to have public transportation, for example. Like where I live out in East Orange County, we have no public transportation, So things like that need to be addressed. The other thing is the nature of a lot of this development is, quite frankly, single family homes that are priced far too expensive for the average, for the folks who need housing. That's not housing of the nature or character that they would be able to purchase. And I think that also was a concern for a lot of us too. So the hope is, by establishing this and kind of setting our boundaries as to where that development happens, we'll have more density in our development and encourage the type of development we need more, rather than just, encouraging sprawl. Now, second part of this, and I'm sorry I didn't update that slide, is question number 10. And this was also most recently passed by the Board of County Commission. And this relates to annexation. So at present, if you are part of the county, you might know this, there are parts of the county that are incorporated, meaning that you live in a particular city, in which case you are a resident of both the county and the city. And so you have a city mayor and a city, commission that you deal with. And the city has its own rules and regulations as it relates to a lot of things, whether it comes to permitting, etc. So, the big one in Orange County is Orlando, right? So you may be part of the city of Orlando, in which case you have additional or other rules, or Winter Park, or any of the other municipalities that we have. Or if you're like me, you may be in the unincorporated part of Orange County. And if you don't know, you can look at the signs around you and look at the symbol next to it, and that'll kind of give you an idea. If it's an orange, you're in unincorporated Orange County. So, we have a different set of rules that we have to deal with. Well, Florida law allows municipalities, or the cities basically, to annex parts of the unincorporated part of the county. And it can do that either because the folks who live in that area ask to join the city. The city can also, try to annex it another way. And that's not something that Orange County has, really stopped or been able to regulate as well. And one of the concerns is that if we have this urban boundary and rural boundary, then what could happen was a city could basically annex a part of the county that we had said was rural, and therefore just skirt all these regulations that we've added. And that was a big concern. And I think it was a warranted concern. We are already seeing some of that sort of thing happen. If you've been watching the news and see what's happening out in, Sunbridge, again, in East County, in the east part of the county, especially in the southeast part of the county. If you've been seeing what the discussion is with Deseret Ranches, which is the large ranch area that's, that's out in East Orange, a lot of agricultural area and wetland area, that is now trying to be annexed by Orlando. And it's like wild to even think about it, because you'd have more land basically outside of what we think of as Orlando out there than you would even have like in our city's core. But the reasons they're discussing this is, quite frankly, they want to be able to develop out there, and they think the city is going to have a better chance of doing it, or is going to be more lenient towards doing it. And one of the reasons why cities have sort of been more willing to do it is they want the developer fees, right? If you develop out there, developers generally pay impact fees, and so some of that money will, go to those cities. And so for too many of our cities, and this is this is my view, and you know, I'm just sharing kind of my view on this, is that a lot of these cities have kind of padded their budgets or not really worried about their money, you know, long term, by just making sure that they keep annexing and having more development come in, and that sort of, you know, fills the gaps in their budget. So the only way the county can make sure that doesn't happen is to pass something like this, which would amend the county's charter to create a process for that annexation, and again require that if annexation happens, they still have to follow the county's development regulations. So again, that rural boundary sort of still applies. And the only people who have the authority to approve or deny those annexations is the county commission, requiring a majority plus one of the vote. So this was a kind of the second part of that urban boundary, and making sure that cities don't act to just sort of skirt these regulations. Well, I did write this particular one, so it is important to note that the joint planning agreements and interlocal agreements are accepted. Anything after the effective date, you'd need board approval for voluntary annexation. Again, you'd need a majority plus one. The Board of County Commission can consider a variety of factors, including whether or not it's in the urban or rural area, whether it's compact, whether it's contiguous. Contiguous meaning it's actually connected to the city, which is a requirement of Florida law. But, you know, I think you'll be surprised to know that sometimes these places are connected by like one road. It's not like the, you know, neighborhoods are connected or anything like that. And if annexation does eventually happen, there has to be an interlocal agreement in place that discusses, you know, if the city is going to provide services or if the county is, etc. And again, anything that's in the rural area still has to follow the county regulations. You know, this has been an issue that's been attacked a lot, and it's already under attack. This last amendment was passed, I want to say August 13th or 14th, 13th, I believe it was. And already there's been litigation filed on it. The argument there is that there wasn't a fiscal statement filed for either of these amendments on these issues. That relates to the fact that Florida statute requires anytime there's a new ordinance that's filed, there has to be an economic impact statement to private businesses that's filed on there. That is not part of it. You know, we'll see where this goes. There's been a hearing that's set for an injunction to keep it on the off the ballot completely. That's set for September the 9th. Don't know where it's going to go. I am not an expert in county and local government. There are lawyers who are. But, you know, I'm someone who's interested in these things. And so I've taken a little bit of a look at it. And you know, there are some interesting legal issues presented. And, you know, this is something in court. I don't want to opine on it. But I will tell you that it will be an interesting argument to see what happens. You know, but I will say, we all expected this to go to court anyway. And so it's not necessarily unusual. It also bears noting that other counties that have eventually had these sorts of controls, they have litigated them quite a bit, and they have still, you know, even all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court have held that you can have these sorts of measures in your in your charter. So, you know, we'll see what ends up happening. This is again this sort of procedural argument, not a substantive argument, but that's going a little bit into the law. So we'll see it. We'll see what ends up happening here. But we do still at this point anticipate that both these issues are going to be on the ballot. So I went over a lot here, and I tried to do it in an hour, but there's a lot of issues involved here. And, you know, I was telling Lee this, and I really think of anybody who's going to be listening to this or who's going to be on this meeting is the type of person that is not just going to be, you know, voting on these issues themselves, but is the type of person who is probably going to be advising the whole family and all their friends on whether they should be voting on it or not. And I do think it's important for you all to have as much of an understanding as possible on these issues so that you can be an advocate for them. I certainly am. I certainly think all 10 of these issues, yes, it's going to make the ballot long. Doesn't matter. They're important, and they're going to be really important to the future of our county. So I'm a supporter of all 10, but I do think it's important for you all to know about it so that you can be advocates in your own communities and to, you know, on these issues as well. And with that, I will stop talking and ask if you all have any questions.
That was an amazing job. I'm
Thanks.
super impressed. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we can
Yes.
have a conversation. So I have a million questions, obviously. If you have a question in the chat, please raise your hand, or you can drop it in the chat as well. I want to go back because obviously I would love to talk about the rural boundary and annexation and some of the talking points that occurred in the press and from various developers that have been ranting online. But before we get to that, I'm actually personally against the expansion of the county commission districts. And this is something that is a little spicy, considering that I worked for Commissioner Nicole Wilson as a district senior aide. So I have experience behind the scenes to see what the workflow is. And and again, speaking for myself, with the strong mayor form of government, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what that means, but with a strong mayor form of government and a huge deficit in capacity at a staff level, and without being able to, with a $22 billion deficit, being able to pay our staff a living competitive wage based on the cost of living here to retain full staff in all departments countywide, it is not necessarily going to help anyone by adding 2 more county commissioners in the mix if getting something on the agenda has to be streamlined through a mayor who has the ultimate say. And from an advocate standpoint, from someone who's constantly going to the Board of County Commission and constantly trying to rally people just to lobby on behalf of the gopher tortoises and on behalf of nature to all of the commissioners, it is really hard to already, with the number of commissioners that we have, convince them to understand what we see on the front lines of various issues in order to win their vote. Now we're finally getting these awesome charter amendments that feel as though, with these majority +1 requirements for things like changing the designation of our protected lands and things like that, it's just adding another hurdle. Like, we get these wins and now we're going to have 2 more people to have to convince. And it feels like we're losing something before we even get it if we also get this additional amendment across the finish line. And last but not least, I know it's 3 points rolled into one with this question, is the money that is plaguing our elections makes it so challenging for us to get grassroots people who really care in those seats. And I think it's so challenging to communicate that to people who might live in an area like Pine Hills that understand that they deserve to have, African-American voices lifted up through their local community, having their own designated commissioner, which I totally understand because that was a huge underlining point in the redistricting process. But at the same time, the money that plagues our campaigns does not necessarily mean that we're going to get adequate and true, honest leadership. To add 2 more places for corruption to plague our democratic process, it just feels like the fight is going to be compounded. So I'd love to hear, I know that this amendment went through various versions, and I think that there was an original proposal for the strong mayor form of government to be dismantled in order to have 2 more commissioners without that, to try and weaken the position of the mayor. So I'd love to hear how we came to that place, what changed, and ultimately, how do you feel given the 3 examples of why I'm against it now?
Yeah, no, I look, I'm so thankful for your thoughts on it because, it's interesting. Look, in all candor, I voted for this. But, this was probably when you take out the rural boundary stuff, this was the second most controversial thing we did, right? And another interesting thing because, um, you know, again, easy to break down some of these issues by like, oh, this is a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. This was one where we had Democrats and Republicans that were against it for their, perhaps their own reasons. But certainly folks with strong opinions on it, and for good reason. So I think let me talk a little bit about the strong mayor thing as well. So if you're not too familiar with it, basically what this is discussing is, if you think of our US government or, our Florida government, we always grew up thinking there's three branches of government, right? And so we've got an executive, a legislative, and a judicial. What's interesting in our form of government in our county is that the, judicial is, of course, the county court system, but the executive and legislative are sort of this odd blended entity because you have the mayor who is in charge of executing the laws, right? So when there's an ordinance and enforcement and all that good stuff, it's sort of the mayor's job to do all these things and set the agenda. But you don't have a separate legislature per se checking the mayor, right? Your legislature is the Board of County Commission, and the mayor also sits on that board and also gets a vote on that board. And so this was something that was discussed a lot because there were earlier versions of what we discussed. There were earlier proposals. I was not on the particular subcommittee that went into those in fairness, so I didn't have a chance to vote on that. But I have interesting thoughts on it because it does sort of violate our notion of what we think our government looks like, right? With checks and balances. But they did. I know that committee went into quite a bit of detail, trying to decide whether or not we should have a separate mayor, and the mayor is kind of the executive, and they operate more like a governor or a president does, and then having this sort of legislative check on them rather than them sitting within the legislative branch and sort of influencing the legislative procedure. I admittedly was not in that subcommittee, so I don't know how they came down on deciding not to touch it. I also was not in the subcommittee that talked about adding folks, but I was ultimately quite swayed by the arguments to add more commissioners. And I think part of the reason I is I did sort of compare, ourselves to other counties. I do think that was relevant, that larger counties tended to have more commissioners. And I think that was an interesting, sort of analysis. But another analysis to me that was an interesting one, and I think that did sway me is just sort of how our, it's, I sort of feel like we like the idea in Florida of our elected officials, coming from some earlier era where they have their day jobs and then they get together at night and, they do their government work. And I think in theory, our commissioners are part-time, right? It's actually not their full-time job. I think if you talk to any commissioner, that is not the case. This is basically their full-time job, right? I mean, that's certainly the case with state house folks, right? And state senators. They are theoretically part-timers, and they go to a part-time legislature, and the rest of the time they work. But if you talk to most of them, they are full-time legislators, because when they're not actually in session, they're still out there, doing everything from raising money to speaking on issues to advocating to being part of the committee process to traveling the rest of the country and talking about it. So I think I think I looked at that as sort of like we need to be willing to invest in the government we want. And so part of that means, being willing to spend a little bit more money if we do need to have, more, a more responsive commission. And, I don't mean this personal to anyone, and certainly not to your former boss, but you know, we did hear from a lot of citizens who expressed that they did not feel that they could get in touch with their commissioner when they needed to, and that they felt there needed to be, you know, more responsiveness there. And it was also an interesting argument to me that our House districts, you know, there's 120 House districts in the state, that they have less people in them than our county commission does. And so I thought, you know, again, that is interesting, right? Because we have more compact House districts versus if you look at some of our, you know, our county districts. I mean, District 5, right? It's running from, you know, Bithlow and Christmas all the way out to, you know, Maitland and Winter Park. And they have some very differing concerns, right? So, you know, and again, I've heard different reasons on why this is the case. And but look at Pine Hills, right? Pine Hills is represented by two different commissioners, but a lot of them feel that they don't get represented by either because their time is, you know, split with, you know, huge other parts of the district that aren't there. So I do think that compactness is a positive thing to have in districts of any sort, right? That if we can have, you know, neighborhoods that are kind of clumped together that are more similar and have maybe similar concerns, that it's probably a good thing overall. I mean, you know, we'll see. And they still need to be new districts that are drawn. But I did find it interesting that in our county, we have not updated the number since 1988, which is really you know, our county has dramatically changed since 1988. And so I kind of felt like this is a modernization that maybe other counties have done and we haven't. So that's why I ultimately decided to support this. But certainly there are, you know, financial arguments against it, and you know, there are folks who've made arguments against it just for you know, government's sake, that maybe we don't need, you know, more government officials on this, or maybe it will be harder to get votes, you know, or easier to get influence if the districts are smaller.
Yeah.
All compelling arguments.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the population of Greater Orlando, and we have a high population, more
Yeah.
than like some states. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
South
Yeah, for sure.
Carolina has 5 million people. We have 3 million on the track of almost 4. So
Yeah,
as just Greater Orlando.
yeah. I mean, you know, I was actually up in Chicago last week, and I ran into folks who I ran for the state house, you know, earlier last year and the year before, and it was interesting because I was speaking to some state house reps that have been elected from other states, and you know, some of them have, you know, we have 120 districts. I think it was Pennsylvania, it's somewhere like 160, and their population is quite a bit less. So you have, you know, areas where, you know, these are much smaller districts, and so it's much easier to run in them, and that requires less money. But because of the size of our state and how fast it's growing, and certainly in our counties, I mean, you know, a county race is super expensive, you know, and that does make it hard for anyone to want to run.
Yeah, I definitely see the benefit if there were mechanisms in place for the county commissioners to be able to have equal say in how the agenda is prioritized. And without that weakening of the mayor's role, or maybe even removing the mayor from the vote, would have been able to even the playing field in the case of adding 2 more commission districts.
Yeah.
But now it feels like because that part was removed, we're just adding more opinions, more, you know, I made a comment, you know, it feels like we're kind of adding like more receptionists, right? And I said that, and people got so upset that I like talked down about the county commission. But at the end of the day, the work itself, the capacity to move the work throughout the, you know, the machine of government, we need more substantial funding for the capacity to be able to do that, which we already see there's such a deficit. And when you have this guardrail of a strong mayor form of government, it just feels like we would just add more people as commissioners that are going to just continue to have constituent cases sit idle for
Sure.
sometimes multiple years at a time, because the legs that we stand on as a county, it's just the money's not there,
Yeah.
or it's not the mayor's priority, so it's not moving forward.
Well, let's see how it works, right? I mean, we can look at it again in 4 years, but I will also say that, hopefully by making it easier for citizens to petition, if this is something that the counties are, or the citizens don't like, my hope is they can take it to the voters directly,
Yeah.
rather than needing to wait on a CRC or on the Commission Act.
So we have two questions in the chat before we get into the spicy rural boundary and annexation conversation. One is, what is the reasoning behind picking 8 commissioners rather than any other number with regard to the Charter Review Commission?
Yeah, really interesting question. Again, not in the committee itself. I just know of their reporting that they did to the rest of the CRC. And I do think they discussed, I think the thought was that they wanted to make sure that you always have an odd number. So that way, you don't have any tie votes. Again, given our sort of current structure, this would basically have 9 votes now instead of the 7 votes that we currently have. Again, including the mayor in that vote. So that's part of it. Another part of it, I think, so right now, and this is an interesting point, is that our school districts actually have 7 members right now, and we only have 6 county districts. So I think, there were some folks who were looking at that as well. I don't specifically know why they landed on this number. I think if they wanted to go higher, there was probably going to be more resistance as well. And so they're probably, 2 more was probably the easiest one number, but I'm kind of speculating and reading the tea leaves on that a bit. I don't exactly know where they came with this number versus others.
Great. And the other question says, why was the write-in candidate rule established in the first place? And it says, as a follow-up, what resistance would be expected against changing this as it played into the District 1 primary this year?
Yeah,
and in 2020.
There may well be some resistance, because anytime you change a rule that's going to benefit some folks, you know what I mean? They'll fight against it. I don't know why it was established in the first place. I suspect, I'm trying to remember, we talked about this pretty early on. I think there was some discussion of it being a interpretation of the rule by a county attorney, and it just kind of carried forward. So I'm not entirely sure that that's something that's, I think the charter itself is ambiguous. I'll have to look at what the charter says, but I believe there's some ambiguity in the charter, but it has been interpreted this way. And so by taking away that ambiguity, that's kind of the method of doing this. I have to look specifically at the words again, and it's been a while since we've looked at it, but my understanding is that's the case, that this was a creature of ambiguity, and not because the charter specifically says that a write-in person has to be this way, but because it's not clear, this clarifies that this is not there. Yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be resistance to it, but I will say, some of these issues were voted on unanimously. There were members of the CRC who are though we were technically don't have a partisan, label in that commission, we knew who were Republicans and who were Democrats, and in some way, and a lot of these things actually had unanimous support. I think this was one of those things that did, or mostly unanimous concern. So
I'll be totally honest with you. This one surprised me simply for the fact that I did not realize our charter stretches into election laws. So, I mean, I'm curious if we could get ranked choice voting locally through the CRC process.
I'm not sure. We do have some limitations on what we can do statewide, but it's an interesting thought. I mean, there's certainly one thing I learned in the CRC process is there's room for innovation. You know, there's certainly some room for innovation, and um, maybe as it relates to our county officials, I can't think offhand if there is a state constitutional provision that would prohibit that, or
Mhm.
um, a general law or general statute that would prohibit it. But we do have some leniency or some stuff we can do when it comes to county officials because we're a charter. So interesting thought.
Yeah, so I'm also curious, out of all of the citizen proposed, so you obviously got 8 across the finish line, which is so impressive. But how many others were there? Were there 20, 30 proposals that just didn't make it through committee or?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of we really did try to put every proposal to some sort of subcommittee. I don't recall the actual number that we had because a lot of them were I could probably find that information out, but I'd have to look into it. But there were a number of them. And we studied ones that were I would say non-controversial and some that were very controversial, right? And some that were like some folks perceived as out of left field, right? I mean, there was a discussion and an entire committee to a citizen idea of establishing a public bank, which has only been done in, I think 1 or 2 counties or government agencies, I think in the whole country, and some it's more of a theoretical thing, but you know, we discussed it. So there was a lot of interesting things that we did look into
Yeah.
that didn't get passed. But I really do think that citizen ideas were given a lot of weight.
So exciting. Brings a lot of hope and trust back into the democratic process, I feel, with the everyday citizen that feels like they're just not being heard at the commission level through the BCC. So out of all of these amendments, I'm curious to hear your reflection on which one or more than one do you think will be the most transcendent for the county? Like, which one are you like sitting back and reflecting on and thinking, wow, this is really going to leave a legacy or a huge impact?
Yeah, I think all of these rural boundary ones are really huge, right? Because again, I just look, I moved to Orlando in 92, right? So I'm now we're in 2024 and I've had a little couple of years outside, for jobs and for and for school, but I've come back here always every time and my family's always lived here. So I look at our county and how it's grown and I think some of the things I've been really proud of that we've done as a county, and then I look at things that I just feel like we just haven't made the right choices or haven't made the tough choices that would need to be made. And some of that is, for a place that's grown as fast as we have and as much as we had and has become increasingly important in every way. Um, when I look at the fact that we still basically have no public transit in this county, is a shock to me, right? That those sort of investments just haven't been made. That we need to have made a long time ago and that we should have prioritized. But the reality is I don't think you can do that without looking at how we develop. I mean, I am, to be very clear, I am not anti-development. I'm like for development. I just think we have to think of how we develop, and be smart about it, and some of the kind of basic questions that I would think any citizen would want ask, right? Like this financial analysis, just as an example, right? I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or who you are, and look, I'm a lawyer. I have represented homeowners. I have represented developers. I've been on all sides of most things. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a defense attorney, right? 18 years in, you've kind of seen the whole spectrum, but I actually think that helps because you kind of do get to see things from all different angles and you don't just write off one side of anything, right? But as I do that, I would think anyone on any side of these would want to make sure that these things make financial sense, right? So when we decide, yes, there's this part of the county right now, it's rural and environmentally sensitive, but we're still going to decide to build there. That may be the right choice for the community. I'm not saying it never is. But when we make that decision, I would like to think we'd have all the facts in front of us, right? I'd like to think we've at least thought it through. Like, what's the real cost of this going to be? What's it going to really cost us to get roads out there? And once they're out there, how are we going to maintain it? Like these sort of basic decisions we want our local government to be able to make, And so when I look at this package of rules that is going to require analysis, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult. I want that to be a hard decision, right? Because if we've already planned 25 years in the future and decided we're not going to build there, and that's going to be part of our rural area, it may well be the case that we need to. But I want us to have really thought about that. I don't want it to be an easy decision, right? I want us to really like make sure that that's the right thing for us to do. So I think that, as long as we make it cheap and easy to develop in those areas versus in the areas where we need development, right? I mean, you drive down Colonial Drive, you drive down Cimarron, you drive down any of our big arteries in our in our county, and you see areas that badly need to be redeveloped, right? And I'm not knocking used car dealerships, but maybe that doesn't need to be still a used car dealership, right? Maybe what that needs to be is incentivize a developer to come in there and make that into multi-purpose, right? Put some apartments there, put some stores there, put some businesses there. Like that's good for everyone. And then if we can do that, then we can run a bus,
Exactly.
So these sorts of things that every other city does that's gotten our size, it's still shocking to me. When my wife moved here, we met online, we got married, she moved here as part of that. She was like, "Where are your tall buildings? You have this many people who live here, and like there's no like apartments. It's like it's all spread out, And it's funny because you almost need somebody from outside the community to point that out to you. Like we're developing in a way that no one else develops, and maybe so I really think those things can, give citizens, give our government, give everyone more information. Maybe we can be smarter about it. Maybe we can be more environmentally respectful about it, because part of this process has to be making sure that, like, we shouldn't be worrying about the econ flooding. We shouldn't be worrying about, the next hurricane comes. And again, some of these suburbs are beautiful, but they flood every time it rains a lot because they just, water used to go there and now it can't. These are not Democratic or Republican concerns, right? These are everyone's concerns. And so I really think that set of rules can really kind of be formative in what our county looks like 20, 30 years from now, and really sort of change the game. And so long answer, but for a variety of reasons, I think that set of changes can be really influential for the county's future.
I mean, that you basically took my next question and just looped it right into your, opinion, your personal opinion about your favorite amendment. It was like music to my ears to hear you take all of those issues and wrap it into one, because my next question was going to be, just today and yesterday, there was a series of op-eds and articles basically antagonizing us, the activists, who have been coming out throughout the CRC process to the Board of County Commissioners, speaking in favor of the rural boundary and the annexation protections, many of whom are Republicans, independents, Democrats, ultra liberals, non-political,
Yeah.
all across the board. Hundreds of people are being labeled as activists right now, because we want to have that say in where our tax dollars are going and where and how we grow, and whether or not we're going to slow down a little bit and reflect on what data do we not have in front of us with regards to the long-term costs of expensive sprawl, or even just the opportunities to incentivize infill. Like, can we stop driving by these empty lots, stop seeing our roads being listed in the top 5 of the highest pedestrian fatalities in the world? Can we take a second and, instead of catering to the same handfuls of mega developers that also fund lobbyists at the state legislature constantly preempting us, is there a way that we, the people, can control where we invest our tax dollars and how we spend money? These narratives that are being published right now in response to our activists' wins of getting the amendments as far as they have, are trying to say that we are causing the developers to retaliate against us and forcing the hand of Deseret Ranch, and basically that property values are going to explode to the point where it's going to be uninhabitable for everyday people because of the rural boundary and annexation work that we've done just recently. Not that costs are not already unaffordable for the average wage here, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on reflecting on some of those talking points.
Look, and you can go online and see all the folks who've spoken in favor of this. I mean, I think that's such an oversimplification of this issue, and it's almost an insult to a lot of the folks who did support this, right? I mean, I'm really telling you, like, yes, we had a lot of 18-year-old activists speak in favor of this, and I'm not knocking them. I think that they are right? They also deserve and have every right to advocate for a community where they don't, need to be taking a car everywhere, and where they know that the environment's going to be safe for them. But I will also tell you, for as many 18-year-olds as we had 80-year-olds who live in farming communities in Orange County, and who have lived in these communities for a very long time, and they have horses and cattle and many more acres than I would know what to do with, right? Who actually are worried because they cannot go to areas of their property anymore because it is literally flooded. And their animals are being, are in danger, and they have, generations who've lived in those parts of Orange County, and they're being pressured to sell and get rid of their land and things like that too, and they want to be able to leave it to their kids. So I mean, there to say it is only an activist concern, I think, is really an oversimplification and maybe a disservice to a lot of the folks who did come out for this over and over again. I mean, the folks in Christmas, the folks in Bithlow, it is not necessarily easy for them to come downtown, twice a month, and yet they did, and it's because this really does touch a number of issues. And look, we live in this state together, and if you don't think that, I think, look at Ian, and I was a candidate during 22, so I remember Ian very well, right? Because that was, during me running and everything like that. And it was so interesting because I was talking to folks who live out in in Osceola, in the parts of St. Cloud that are developing, for example. And these are not folks who you think of as your average Democratic voter, right? These are pretty Republican and and whatnot, but they were so worried because their houses were flooding, right? And they were worried because their traffic is out of control, and they can't get to where they need to, and they just keep on adding more houses out there, and they keep on, I live in Stony Brook East, right? Suburban community. I will tell you that how many folks who are my neighbors and neighbors in Eastwood and neighbors in Avalon Park who were promised a park a whole long time ago, and yet we never got one, and that was part of the deal with allowing more development, right? Their concerns about schools becoming more and more crowded, and yet they're not sure where these kids are going to go if they continue to greenlight development. So these are real concerns that are not easily, put to some, yes, these lefty apple, activists who are showing up and taking this stand. I mean, these are real communities, and for those of us who live out here, we see the issues, right? I mean, we see the traffic that's showing up when more people show up, right? And we see the lack of public transit, and we see the water issues, water quality issues, and the flooding issues that become more and more apparent to us anytime that there's a big storm. So, this is, we all live here. I was just hearing a story today about how there's only so much that our pipes can handle, and so much that our streams and rivers and everything can handle, just as they process the water that needs to be processed for people to live here. And that's something we all have to be concerned about.
Right.
I'm not against development. This is a question of are we thinking these decisions through? And when we do develop, which we will and we should, are we doing it the right way?
Well, as a lawyer, I'd love to hear, because another argument that I've only ever heard from the developers, not from the people that have lived out there for 40 plus years, but one of the arguments I keep hearing is we are going against certain landowners' property rights. And I keep hearing property rights thrown as a talking point. And also another thing I really want to bring up is when we segue into annexation, the city's ability to annex as home rule, like as harming our ability to have home rule fair across. So I'd love to hear those two arguments kind of dissected. For
sure. Well, it is interesting, right? And these, unfortunately, and look, I'm a lawyer. I get it. You make the argument that you need to make. But I will say, home rule is a funny thing, right? Home rule is like whoever's in charge. It's when you start caring about home rule. If you're in charge on top, then you don't care so much. And if you aren't not in charge, then you care a whole lot about what happens with home rule and with preemption. But look, I think to address the property rights issue very briefly, I think that there's one concept that we often talk about when it comes to anything to do with the government as a lawyer, right? And that's this concept of notice, right? Anytime you're dealing with anyone's property rights or anything like that, you have to ask this question: were people noticed? Like, did they know this could happen? And did they have the opportunity to comment or say something about it? So it's like one of those administrative law things that they always ask about. Well, and then there's people, when you buy something, you are on notice, right? So if you are buying in a particular area, if you are buying an area that is in the rural area and it has been written as rural and it has been zoned as rural, then you are on notice that that area is not intended to be developed a particular way. So I don't think it is a very strong argument to say that if I can't change that zoning, that my property rights are being taken away. Actually, no, you bought into it knowing that it was farmland, right? So you were fully on notice as to what you were buying, right? I think that argument as to property rights is a different argument if you are buying land that's been, that is zoned commercial and suddenly it's being changed, or zoned residential and suddenly it's being turned into agricultural. This is generally land that is out in the outskirts that all along our comprehensive plan has said this area is not set for development and there's no resources and the county's not going to be putting its infrastructure in these areas. So if you buy those lands or you own those lands and those regulations are in place, I don't know how you make that argument that we're somehow taking away your ability to change that. I don't know. I don't see it as an argument. You know, again, I can certainly tell you that the folks who are agricultural and intend to be agricultural in those areas, they feel that they're losing their property rights because they bought into an area that was supposed to be, you know, especially speak to folks in the west part of the county who live in, there are parts of the county that are considered rural settlements, right? They bought in that area for the express purpose of living in a rural area. They did not want to have neighbors all around them. They wanted to have a way of life where they can have horses, right? And suddenly they can't do that anymore, right? Because there are suburbs propping up all over, and their neighbors maybe have sold, and all these various issues, and water intrusion is happening for them. So for a lot of those folks, they feel like their property rights have been violated, right? Because they had something in mind that was taken away from them in some respects. So, you know, I think these arguments can be used either way, you know, to justify whatever side. You know, I'm a believer in home rule. I absolutely am. But you know, I also think that this is being used as a sword, not a shield, by some municipalities in this particular way. And you know, it's interesting that a lot of these folks were put on notice when we first started to discuss these issues, and they never showed up. We had a year and a half of discussions on this. They never showed up, and now they are. And so I think that you know, I'm not sure I fully buy it, but I get they're going to make the arguments, and that's their job to do.
Well, I think it's very interesting, something I'd like to make sure we emphasize again and again. You had a slew of lawyers, tons of time for feedback, multiple public hearings on each issue, multiple opportunities for engagement. And it's not just some quick process where a citizen comes with a proposal, you guys look at it, you just all put your minds together and say, this sounds like a good idea. Like, it's a very rigorous process to get it to the point where it's on the ballot. You know, it's tried and compared to other you know, policies across the state. It's legally scrutinized by a team. I mean, you have so many different avenues to make sure that what we get on the ballot is what fits.
Yeah. You know, I'll say on this, like, of all the critiques and arguments that I've heard, this one is probably the most like laughable and personal to me is that somehow we did this in the dark. Because I mean, it really couldn't be further from the truth, right? Not only did we, you know, notify every city, notify, you know, each of their departments, tell them of all our meetings, not only were all published and open and everything, we elicited comments from everyone. We had the zoning and planning folks and all this stuff from the cities, from the counties there. We invited folks throughout this whole process. But in addition to that, I mean, for those of us who were on this commission, we spent countless hours. I mean, countless hours on this, even just this rural boundary issue, for example. You know, we've probably had 15 to 20 meetings, like somewhere in that range. These meetings would often and mind you, this is unpaid, right? So we were showing up at sometimes 8 a.m., 9 a.m., sometimes at, you know, 1 p.m. and working through the rest of the day, you know, for hours and hours sitting there unpaid, you know, doing this work. And so, and there were folks who were at almost every single meeting. And so, you know, I think it's, you know, I will also say that the moment we got closer to the finish line, suddenly we had lobbyists show up as well, sit in on those meetings. So they knew what was happening. You know, I don't think that, I don't think it's really I think it's a little disingenuous to say that this was somehow done in the middle of the night and you know, people didn't know that it was going to happen.
Yeah, and with the annexations, you had the city managers and staff engaged in a lot of those conversations in the early parts of the rural boundary conversation before Commissioner Bonilla brought it to the Board of County Commissioners. basically like what we have now through the BCC, it was birthed out of the work that you've done at the
For
charter
sure.
review.
And I mean, that's to say there were city attorneys who were showing up to our subcommittee meetings and objecting to it then, right? So, and some of those objections were taken very seriously to the point where some of the carve outs, and there are people who don't love them, but there are carve outs to this, right? Which is that if we're already in a joint planning agreement, if we're already in an intercity agreement, if we are already working with some municipality on these issues and we've already decided where that development's going to go, none of the stuff that's being discussed is going to affect that, right? And they can still be changed. So in other words, if we work with Winter Garden, Apopka, any of these cities, Orlando, where we have an inner city agreement where we're already decided where development's going to go, that is open to discussion, and those discussions can still be had. I think so. It's not like this has suddenly happened out of nowhere, and any of those existing conditions, they continue to apply today. This is just for changes,
So last question that I have, and we have 10 minutes left, so I'd like to wind it down for folks that are listening that want to ask a question, but so we go ahead, we have this rural boundary annexation moving forward to go into November, and now these developers are suing, and now there's been these huge swaths of fast-tracked annexations that are trying to be pummeled through before the November vote. I would like for you to just reflect on that, and also, is there anything that the county can do to almost stall, I don't want to say purposely stall, but I just mean from a legal standpoint. I mean, this needs to be negotiated, knowing that the people want to have their voices heard, and Orange County really wants to have a seat at the decision-making table for this huge amount of growth that's coming. I don't see it as cause and effect. I see it as we've known that huge swaths of land from Sunbridge and beyond were already in the works. We've seen the Central Florida Expressway toll road, long-term master plan. We know what they're gearing up for. We've seen the hundreds of thousands of acres that the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints owns from Seminole County all the way down past Osceola, parts of like Brevard. We've seen how much land they own. We know what's coming. It's just a matter of, because we are trying to, as citizens, get ahead of it, they're now pushing as much as possible forward. Maybe as a lawyer or as an appointee, how do you reflect on that?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. We sort of saw it coming. We did know, I think, all along, and again, I'm speaking for myself here, but I think there was recognition in the process that the moment something like this gets close to happening, there will be a sort of a gold rush or a mad rush, or that there will be folks who are going to try to get around it as quickly as possible. I think to some extent that is also why we pushed so hard to get this done by now, right? That's also why we worked, overnight. Like we were working hard to try to get these things passed, because we knew the moment you try to make a change in the system, that would be a problem. And we also knew that we needed to get this passed and enacted as soon as possible, because if we don't do it now, but we just discuss it, then people will even have more time to get ready for it and to prepare for it, and to kind of eliminate our opportunity to do this 4 years down the road, right? Because that's only how often these things can happen. So I mean, and there's a point that's been brought up, I think, in the chat here, is just that there is a concern that we were putting a whole lot on the ballot at once, and yet when we started, we thought we would not do that. There were specific discussions about prioritizing what's really important. But with some of these, I think there was a, if not now, then it'll never happen, or it's going to be much, much harder later. There was that thought process that if we don't push this on now while we have a shot, it's going to get even more difficult. So even if it's tough, let's get it on. And you know, I am happy. You know, we're all Democrats here. I think for Democrats, I'm happy that our local party has taken it seriously and has voted to, you know, support all of these amendments. And so, you know, as we get our voter guides and things like that going as we gear up for November, you know, hopefully that's all part of it, and we make it clear. There is sort of an ease to just saying it's yes on everything, right? So if we can say all the county stuff, yes, you know, hopefully that does make it easier. But it's not an easy process to you know, to support all these or to get folks to vote for all of them. And there's always a discussion of how many folks are actually going to work their way through the entire ballot. I think as Democrats, if we can encourage folks to vote by mail, that helps, because then they have time to sit down with their ballot, right? Versus needing to stand in line and things like that. So voting early, vote by mail, the sort of normal democratic stuff we encourage people to do, I think really does make a big difference when it comes to making sure that we do this. And I think groups like this make a big difference because, again, you are not in this meeting, you are not involved in groups like this because you are not a leader. You are a leader at some level, right? You have your family looks to you for leadership, your friends look to you for leadership. They maybe won't do the research on these issues, so they will listen to your thoughts and your opinions on this. And if you tell them, hey, this is important and here's why, it's going to matter. It's going to matter. And so that's why I've been lucky, and you know, Eric Grimmer, who's also been on the committee, on the commission with me, like we've been going around talking to as many groups as we can on this, because if we can tell the, you know, the sort of thought leaders in each of your community about these issues and why they're important, I know it's going to trickle down to the rest of our community too. And you know, I am happy that it will be on a November ballot, and I am separately very excited about our election coming this November. And I think there's going to be a lot of Orange County Dems who are, and we only need a majority vote, I believe, to get these things passed. So that's great, right? We don't need to hit a 60% or 70% threshold to get it passed. So if we can get our Dems to show up and vote, you know, these things are can win, you know, they can pass. And so we have to do our part on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, you know, you have put in countless time, and now you're doing this advocacy work to make sure that everyone has opportunities to learn about these charter amendments. So I just want to thank you, especially since you have two little babies at home. And so I just want to say thank you so much for giving us all of this time. And this video will hopefully be an opportunity to share it across all the clubs and caucuses. If you can also send me your PowerPoint slide, I will attach it as a PDF and just send it to thousands and thousands of people after this. So
Awesome. I got to do a few little fixes on it, then I'll get it to you. And don't thank me, thank my wife, because she's dealing with the kids as I'm on here.
thank you, wifey.
She is wonderful for allowing me to have this opportunity to really spend the time with you all. But she knows that it matters. She knows it matters to me, certainly, but to our community. And I think it's going to be really these can really be some of the biggest changes for our county's future.
Thank you. Awesome. Have a
Awesome.
good night,
Thanks, Lisa, for putting
everyone.
this
Thank you,
together. Thanks everyone
Rishi.
for joining.
Appreciate you. Have a wonderful
Absolutely.
evening.
Yep. Take care. You do the same.
Bye-bye.